Shout out to Splash Gordon, who produces all of the instrumentals that I use. Because social media doesn't allow you to stream any other music without having copyright licensing. But today's topic, managing stress, part two, and I mentioned this last week. When we don't control what we can control, we are ultimately being controlled. And we're gonna jump into part two of managing stress today, right after our intro.
You are excellence. Your mind is of excellence. Your visions are of excellence. Your unique superpower is nothing short of excellence. You amplify a voice of excellence. Your contribution to this world will be of excellence. You will achieve your highest goals and desires with excellence. Excellence in everything, every time.
Good afternoon, well, good evening, and happy Tuesday. I'm Lanita, hosting your favorite soft skills coach, and Excellence in Everything Live is my weekly podcast to provide practical tools to increase the communication skills between those that you love and that you lead. I want to start by saying before we jump into today's topic, I am not a licensed medical professional, but I am a person who studies human behavior, and I have a very keen interest in managing my own stress and behaviors. And I really wanted to share on this topic. And not to mention, it was very well participated in last week. If you're watching live, go ahead and type in the comments. I am here. Let me pull up my comments so I can make sure I see you. And if it's your first time joining, let me know where you're watching from. It's always great to see where people are streaming from. You just never know who you're communicating with. And at any point, if you have anything you want to share, comment, disagree, agree, you want to say amen, hallelujah, drop that in the comments too. I go back post show and I read your comments, and I will acknowledge them when I'm live as well. I will acknowledge them when I'm live as well. Okay, let's jump in. So we talked about last week, stress is a normal reaction to everyday pressures. We talked about the difference between acute stress and chronic stress. Acute stress being a short term, essentially a short term version of stress that you feel due to like an anticipation of a project, a very large obligation, and that feeling passes. Chronic stress is a long term feeling of stress. It is more intermitting. I hope I said that right. Meaning it's happening repeatedly, consistently. We talked about those two different types of stress. We also talked about the causes of stress. We talked about how to identify stress by way of the symptoms the body is indicating. And so we spent a lot of time last week on the informational side on how to identify it. Today I want to talk about how to actually manage it. And no, we're not going to talk about dieting, which will be a great way to start eating healthy, eating more healthy, and drinking more water and eating more power foods. Absolutely, that would be great. We're not going to talk about getting more sleep because absolutely that would be beneficial if you were able to get more rest. And if you were able to monitor your sleep levels. Yep, we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about fitness. Yes, it would be great for you to release those healthy endorphins, and the release of the good hormones that you get from exercising, laughing, eating something that you like, smelling something that you are very fond of. Yep, but we ain't going to talk about that. But those are some ways you can manage your stress. I want to talk about other healthy coping mechanisms that are a little bit more practical than the ways that I just mentioned. And one of them is establishing your boundaries. Establishing your boundaries. I ran across this woman on YouTube. She is a holistic psychologist. And she talked about here are 5 boundaries that you need. And I wanted to show the visual. I'm not going to play her video. But she said you need emotional boundaries. You need material boundaries. Emotional being people coming to maybe dump their emotions on you or to maybe talk to you on the phone and maybe vomit their feelings often because you're like a safe space. Maybe you have material boundaries. Maybe you are often asked for people to lend things or use some things that you have. Maybe people want your time and your energy. They want to just be around you. Or maybe they don't honor your time and they're late. Maybe they are when they're with you, they're not fully present, meaning they're distracted by something else other than connecting with you. Maybe you need mental boundaries about maybe other people infusing their opinions, values, and belief systems onto you or projecting those things onto you. And then finally, she talked about the physical boundaries, and we know those, like your expectation of how others interact with you by way of touch, physical intimacy, and that sort of thing. These are 5 boundaries she said that the holistic psychologist, suggested. And I just want to make it simple because while this is good, those are great boundaries. I just want to know, like, what, and we talked about last week, the types of triggers that you have. I asked you to do an inventory exercise, the things that you absolutely enjoy that you have to do, things that you can't wait to get rid of. We talked about throwing some D's on it. And again, if you didn't catch last week, you got to go back and get it. But in addition to those things, I want to, at a very simplified way, I would like to ask you, what are some things that you find yourself giving away that maybe puts a strain or additional pressure on the everyday stressors that you already experience? And a lot of times boundaries are, well, simply definition, boundaries are you setting expectations for how other people are to behave in their interactions with you. And it's the greatest way to prioritize self, and not in a selfish way, but in a health first way. So let's say a major source of your stress is you are overloaded with work. Maybe you are understaffed. You're taking on a lot of responsibility. Let's say you have children, so you also are responsible for their transportation to and from. And let's say you're a single parent or you don't have as much support as you would like. So your stressors happen from an obligatory standpoint. Those are things that you can't immediately eliminate. The obligations from your children. You could delegate, maybe asking for some help. Maybe you can't eliminate the tasks that you have related to work, but maybe you could advocate, speak up about the things that you're managing and ask for reprioritization of projects. So a boundary in this example might be scheduling a meeting to say, hey, these are a list of things that I'm working on, but I feel very overwhelmed. Which of these projects do you find are most priority right now so that I could have a healthy work-life balance? So sometimes boundaries look like advocating for your own needs. And the only person that could advocate for your needs would be you. And so I'll give you another example of a need to set boundaries. Maybe your children are very active in a lot of things, Monday through Friday, and even on Saturday. Maybe Sunday is, in your mind, it's your day, but you find that they put things on your calendar or have an expectation that you will also continue doing other tasks on Sunday. Well, a boundary that you may consider might be sitting down to talk with your children about how Monday through Saturday you really sacrifice your self-time, and you are very limited during the week for you time. Maybe you might say, it's important for me to actually sit down, breathe, and actually think. Otherwise, I'm exhausted and the week starts over. So you advocating or establishing a boundary in that instance might just be you communicating your desire for rest. Or maybe your boundary on Sundays, I would like to ask that we not add any additional things on my plate. Or maybe a boundary might be tagging a godparent or auntie or uncle, if there are things that happen on Sunday, asking them if they can step in, since you tend to take the load or the brunt of the work. So boundaries don't have to be a very rigid thing or like you can't touch or I can't do and I'm not going to do. It could really just be you verbalizing the thing that you need. You need time. You need rest. And in healthy relationships, when our needs are expressed, those who love us and make our needs a priority should respond in a way that says, okay, I hear you, let's make some changes. And so when we lack boundaries, that's a very easy way to compound on stress. So you add the pressures of other people's expectations onto your obligations. And when you don't speak up about that, you are being what do they call it when you are participating in something, but a silent accomplice to your own detriment. So sometimes boundaries are simply you speaking up to say this is what I need in that moment. And we talked about how compounded stress over time, the strain that puts on your organs and the strain that puts on your body, and the byproduct of having chronic stress for a long period of time. It alters your mood. You could possibly gain weight. There are a lot of factors related to stress being the first the first source of a person's illness. They can also transfer or transition into, or I should say, they can become also a mental illness. And so while it's a small thing now, not establishing boundaries and being mandated or inundated, I should say, with a lot of tasks, it's a small thing that you may see now, but a compounded result of that could be a bigger thing. And so as the faster we can catch those small things and revert them into healthy things, the more control we can have over the things that we can control. So, learning to enforce your boundaries. So, what I would say is if this is something that you are learning to, what's the word I would say? You're learning to implement. You're learning what it means to enforce a boundary. Again, I would sit down and do an assessment of when do you most feel like your needs are not important. So you sit down and write down, okay, maybe you'll sit down and write down your obligations, the things that you have to do on the left side. And then on the right side, I want you to write down when do you feel like when you're doing these things, are there any of your needs that are not being considered? Like maybe you have an overlap in time obligation, so you're tired. Maybe you need rest. But only you would be able to see that. So writing it down, I think sometimes is the first step. If you're not a person who writes it down, ask your village. Like, what do you observe? What are some things that you observed about my behavior, knowing that I have all these things on my plate? You'd be surprised what people can observe about you, like the conditions of your let me rephrase that. You would be surprised how people observe the core of who you are in comparison to who you are when you have so many things on your plate. So ask a trusted friend, what do you observe about me when I'm in a state of like stress and or I have a lot of things going on? Because sometimes we can't see it. So we should ask those who are connected to us to help us identify those blind spots. Hi, Don. Thank you so much for joining tonight. It's so good to see you on Facebook. If you have any questions, you can jump right on in. Another way when I think about boundaries, I think about time. And an example of this is that on Tuesdays, my time is stretched, to be honest. And my mom, we live about 45 minutes away, and sometimes she'll stop by on a Tuesday. Now I have all these meetings back to back. I prepare for our podcast, which takes about 2 hours for me to prepare. But then she would be here and I would be like wanting to engage with her. And remember last week I told you when I have stress, it shows up right here in my neck. And I would have this pain right here because I'm thinking about, oh my God, I have to prepare for the podcast. I have to do this meeting. And I also have to be hospitable. And so a boundary that I actually advocated for was, Mom, on Tuesdays, those days are really tight for me. You can come over on any day. But on Tuesdays, I never said don't come, but I just said the expectation that I will be able to fully be present with you would be very unrealistic. People always say I'm very good with words, but I just wanted to set the precedence that while I do honor you and I love that you want to come and spend time with me on Tuesdays, that's not the best day. So that's a way establishing boundaries, and that's something so easy that you can do. When you already have a lot of things on your plate, like you already have a lot of things, if you anticipate a very large project, which requires a lot of your time after work, before work planning, another way that you can manage your stress during those periods is don't commit to doing anything else. And telling those who are closely connected to you, giving them a heads up. So if you have an active group chat, your girlfriends or guy friends, You might say, hey, just giving y'all notice, next week is going to be crazy bananas. I will not be in the group chat, or my responses might be delayed, but I'm cool, I'm good. I'll check back in when I'm finished. But giving people a heads up, a boundary that they should not expect something from you that you can't give. You can do the same thing with your family. You can say, hey, next week is going to be crazy. I may not have a chance to cook. I may not be able to pick you up and take you there. And my energy might be limited, but it's only for a matter of time. That's a way of establishing a boundary and an expectation up front. But those that you love and are currently leading, I think it's important to communicate those things ahead of time. I think it also helps it helps to prevent conflict, because I talked about this, how last week, when you are under stress, it could alter your mood. And sometimes we don't realize it. We're a little more edgy. We're a little more anxious. We're a little more short tempered. We have a little less patience. And we communicate that way. So when we would normally be, detail oriented, very engaged, when you're under stress and you're under deadline, it might be short, straight to the point. Okay. Without the context, the person that you're communicating with, without them knowing, and not in detail, but without them knowing maybe the things that you have on your plate, it's harder for them to practice grace. So you empower them to practice grace by saying, hey, this week is going to be tight. So if I'm short-lived, or I reach my word count, or I'm a little snappy, it's not personal. It's just I got a lot of stuff going on. Tell them that on the front end. Again, that's just a very easy way to have a healthy relationship, even in the midst of having a really tough or very condensed and tight schedule. Before I share you the last thing, I wanted to remind you that there are 3 ways that you and I can work together. I'm always advocating for that. And I don't know if you know this, but all of the content that I teach on Tuesdays, they mirror the kind of content that I offer in small groups, workshops, and keynotes. So if you ever see me teaching something and you're saying, hey, I would love to figure out how I can get that information in front of this group of people, here are 3 ways. 1, you can bring me in to speak. Sometimes that looks like a keynote. You can bring me in to train. That would look like a workshop. It can be a 1-day, half day. It could be a multi-day, depending on the topic and your needs. And then finally, if you're looking for a long-term solution to develop your staff or clients or frontline employees, maybe we might forge a partnership. This is my favorite because I get to teach and then see the practice of the skills and then the evolution of a person over time. And so again, those are the 3 ways that we can work together, if you were thinking about that as you're watching today. So we talked about boundaries, and 2 ways in which you can set boundaries when you are communicating that with the people that you love and or lead. You would use I statements, very clear ones. I need rest this week. I need more free time this week. Those are clear I statements. I need for you guys to be quiet after 9 so I can get in bed because I have a lot of things to do this week. Those are clear I statements. And the other way is learning to say no and saying it without a feeling of guilt, because you know that you're honoring a boundary that's helping you to manage your stress. So when you're wavering on your yes or your no, you're basically communicating to yourself, the stating how you feel doesn't matter. What matters is maybe showing up or meeting the needs of other people. If your no wavers consistently, that's what you're communicating to yourself. You don't necessarily matter as much as making sure this person is taken care of. And if you do that over time, the impact that it could have not only on your body and your mental health, but also your self-esteem, because it becomes associated with people being pleased by you sacrificing something. That gets old over time. So I'm just saying, to get ahead of that, learning to say no without guilt. And you can say no softly. I would love to. I promise you I would. But I just can't. My favorite is I really don't have the capacity to do that this week. That's my favorite. That's my way of saying no. I also will say that's definitely something I'll consider. Right now I have quite a few things on my plate, but it's definitely something I want to come back to. Another way of saying no. You might even say, I'm not interested at this time, but it may be something I may circle back with. That's something it's not a hard no. I would like to consider it, but I just don't have the capacity to think through it and process it right now. So you can find ways to say no without feeling like you're anal or selfish. You say, I really don't have the capacity like I thought how I would. So I talked about setting boundaries. That's one way to manage your stress. We talked about practical ways that you set boundaries, why boundaries are important. And the last thing is when you have a high volume of things causing stress, it's going to come up. Sometimes sometimes it comes out of the woodworks, as they would say. What I would suggest, and I do this, I plan how I'm going to decompress. So if I know I'm planning a major event, I know it's going to take the wind out of me in terms of critical thinking, troubleshooting, day of, lots of logistics. I plan how I'm going to decompress. So the next week, I might have no meetings available on my calendar. Or the next week, I might have no social engagements. I plan no family things, no doctor's appointments, because that time is meant to rest. I've seen some of my colleagues in my industry, they plan a spa day a few days after they've done a major project or major launch. Or they plan a trip, or they plan a visit to a loved one like grandma, a place where you can go and get a sense of rest. But planning how you're going to decompress is a great way to manage your stress, and it gives you something to look forward to. Okay, Don, I didn't see all these questions here. Let me come here. I was over here just running my mouth. Don says, how do you manage stress? Whew, that's a good one. Well, one of the things that my therapist has helped me to do is she says that I spend more time in my work than I do with doing leisure things. So she asks that I once a week jump on Eventbrite and look for things to do that don't require me to think, just require me to be present, and it's an interest of mine. So when a part of managing my stress, and it sounds counterproductive, but I look for an outlet that week. So can I go to a poetry night? Can I drive to grandma's house and just hold her hand and laugh at her jokes? Can I go by the candle making class and make a candle with some strangers? So that's one way I definitely do manage stress. And I would say another way is I go to bed early as much as I can. If I know that I'm overwhelmed, I don't push myself to work late. I would rather shut down early and wake up early than to push through the night and stay up late. But that's just me. So those are two ways. Great question, by the way. Dawn said, my time is stretched on Tuesdays as well. I don't know what it is about Tuesdays. I often share this too, that I front load my weeks because I want to, as the week progresses, I want to do less. So I put all of my meetings Monday through Thursday. I try to do Monday through Wednesday. All of my recurring obligations Monday through Thursday. And I try to leave Friday open. Sometimes things spill over, but that's a boundary that I have to often enforce. When people say, are you free on Friday? And I'll say this. I say I front load my week so that Fridays can be my day of rest. Do you have any availability on any other day this week? That's a very soft way to enforce my boundary. That's a really good example too. Dawn said, my favorite is no. Listen, that's a great place to be. It's freeing when your no does not make you feel like you are not it's freeing when your no does not make you feel a sense of obligation based on how the person responds, a sense of obligation to make them feel right and or better. So when your no does not waver based on what you perceive, how other people respond, that's a freeing place. And it actually took me quite some time to get there. But I have arrived. I have really arrived there. All right, that's our topic for tonight. I would love to know what your major takeaway was. Again, this was part 2 of managing stress. If you join on the latter end, part 1, we talked about identifying your stressors, how stress shows up in the body, because some of us don't even know we're under stress. And so if you want to catch that, it is also on YouTube for you to catch last week's episode. Next week, just to give you a little teaser, we're going to jump into some hard skills. So if you didn't know the difference between the two, soft skills are skills that you can't particularly measure, like problem solving, critical thinking, managing conflict. And a hard skill is typically something that you can measure. You can associate like what you learn from it, or if it's working well and or not. And a hard skill would be like budgeting, learning a specific software, would be like time management. And we're gonna jump into a series on hard skills for the month of May. I'm really excited about that. But more info about that will be forthcoming. But yes, if you happen to catch the episode tonight, I would love to hear what were your major takeaways. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel and or like the video. It increases our exposure and allows other people to see the great content that we share. Don said the major takeaway from tonight was that there are different ways to say no. Yes, there are. You can get creative. You can even say, thank you so much for thinking of me. I wish I was able to do it. That's you. I wish I was able to do it, but I'm not. You didn't even say the word no. So yes, you can get creative about essentially establishing boundaries for how you want people to treat you. And I'll end by saying this. We have to train people how we want them to treat us. It sounds harsh, but we really do have to train people how to treat us. And it's because we were designed naturally to be self-seeking. We each think of our own needs, our own self. We have to think there has to be some intentionality when you are interacting with someone to think of them first. But naturally, we are all self-seeking. And so when you put that in perspective, the only way to kind of teach someone how to love you is by establishing your boundaries. So if you like to be loved in a more healthy way, in a way in which your needs are important and are met, then you have to advocate for that. And so you might speak up. And here's the thing, it don't feel good when your boundaries are enforced. No one likes rules, and no one likes to be called out. No one likes to feel like you're checking them. So yeah, it's going to it's going to rub them the wrong way for a little while. Give it time. The person it will transition from rubbing them the wrong way to that's just important to them, so I'm going to honor it. But it's not an easy thing. So I didn't get a chance to mention that tonight. If you find that there's some friction when you are imposing your boundary, that's normal. And you can affirm the person that you're with, like, hey, this isn't personal. This is me. Like, this is something that I really need. And I know you love me, so that means how I feel matters to you. So, listen, if you got to copy and paste that whole phrase, do it. Because what's most important is that you feel loved, heard, and that your needs are met. All right, that's all I got, family. I absolutely love you. There's nothing you can do about it. I'll see you next Tuesday at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time, p.m. See you later.